All right, let's dive in. Today we're heading to Accra, Ghana. We're going to see what it's like to live there as an expat.
Sounds exciting.
I think so too. We're going to be using this article from accra-ghana.com called Living the Expat Life in Ghana.
Okay.
Just glancing at it, I'm picturing like sunshine, those vibrant markets that you always see in photos, and that Ghanaian warmth everyone talks about.
Yeah.
But it's not like all beaches and good times, right? The article also mentions some challenges like traffic and utilities being a bit unreliable.
The realities of life anywhere, really.
Exactly. So let's unpack this, see if Accra lives up to, the hype, and maybe even more importantly, if it could be a good fit for someone listening right now.
Love it. Let's get into it.
So, one thing that stood out to me was this mix of modern and traditional, which the article talks about.
It's fascinating, right? You have these upscale areas like East Legon with these luxury apartments and everything.
Oh, wow.
But then you can step right into a local market and find incredible deals on all sorts of fresh produce. It's a cool contrast.
That is a great point. It really shows that the cost of living could be all over the place depending on what your lifestyle is. The article also mentions that imported goods can be pricey, and it even suggests that people think about what they truly miss from back home versus, what they could adapt to.
Yeah.
So thinking about the listener, what kind of spending changes do you think someone would need to be okay with to make Accra work, financially?
That's a really good question. Let me put it this way. You could get a meal at a local what they call a chop bar for just a couple of dollars.
Oh, wow, that's pretty affordable.
Right. But then you go to a fancy restaurant, a similar meal could easily be 10 times the price.
Okay, so there's a real range there.
Absolutely. And that's where those lifestyle choices come in, right? Are you someone who's happy cooking with fresh, local ingredients, or do you need, those imported brands and all the convenience foods?
It makes a difference.
Oh, it makes a huge difference in your budget.
That comparison is really helpful. I mean, it really puts things in perspective. So the article also talks about Ghana's economy. It says it's growing and paints a pretty positive picture, especially in sectors like, energy, mining, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
If someone's thinking about a career move, what more can you tell us about that?
Well, those are big sectors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's worth looking a little closer. So take entrepreneurship. Real estate and tech, those are booming right now. And for, traditional jobs, it depends on your skills and where you're from. Visas will be a factor.
Right.
And knowing typical salaries for expats in your field, that's key to knowing if it makes financial sense.
Absolutely. Doing your research beforehand. Okay, let's talk about getting around. The article describes this really interesting mix of transportation, from those shared minibuses called trotros to ride-hailing services.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever experienced Accra's transportation?
I haven't personally ridden in a trotro.
Woo!
But they're definitely a big part of the city. Everyone talks about them. They're super cheap and efficient. But I hear they can be pretty chaotic and packed, especially if you're new to the city.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The article says many expats just opt for taxis or ride-hailing apps like, Bolt and Uber for the convenience.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially when you're still, figuring everything out. But whether it's a trotro or a taxi, one thing you can't avoid is the traffic. The article's pretty upfront about that.
Right, it's notorious. It's just part of life in Accra, something to get used to. It's almost like a test of your patience and how adaptable you are.
Oh, definitely.
But there's also this concept of Ghana time, which the article mentions.
Oh, yeah, I was wondering about that.
It's basically a more relaxed approach to timekeeping. Social connections often come before strict schedules.
So it's not just about being late, it's like a different cultural view of time itself.
Exactly. Imagine this, your meeting's at 2 p.m., people might show up closer to 2:30, and it's totally normal. It can be tough for people who are, used to punctuality being super important. But it's also a chance to embrace a different pace of life.
I can see how that would be a big adjustment.
Right.
Now let's talk about healthcare, which is a major concern for anyone living abroad. The article mentions private hospitals meeting international standards.
Right. Places like Nyaho Medical Center and 37 Military Hospital are known for good quality care.
That's reassuring.
Many expats go there. But one thing to remember is that good health insurance is essential, no matter how healthy you are.
Good advice in general, really. The article also talks about safety, saying Ghana is considered one of the safest African countries. But it does warn about petty theft and scams, in crowded areas. What more can you tell us about staying safe in Accra?
Well, the article highlights the general safety, but every experience is different, right?
That's true.
Like any big city, there are riskier areas. Being aware, especially at night, is always smart. Talk to other expats or locals, see what they do to stay safe.
Local knowledge is invaluable.
Absolutely. It's about finding a balance between being cautious, but not letting fear control everything.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's lighten things up a bit. What about Accra's social scene? The article describes it as pretty lively, with expat clubs, local hangouts, events at places like the African Region Hotel, and of course those beautiful beaches. What stands out to you about Accra's social life? It sounds like a really cool mix of cultural immersion and relaxation. One night you could be enjoying live music somewhere, the next day soaking up the sun on the Body Beach.
Exactly. And the article mentions Alliance Française. They host events too.
Huh.
A bit of European culture right there in Accra.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's that mix of influences that makes Accra so special, I think. You have traditional Ghanaian music and dance, contemporary art exhibitions, international films. It's really diverse.
There's truly something for everyone. But let's be real, the article doesn't hide the challenges of being an expat. It talks about bureaucracy, traffic, and utility issues, like those power outages, dumbsore, as they call it. What advice would you give someone feeling a bit overwhelmed by these potential difficulties?
I think the key is to keep a sense of humor and be adaptable.
Yeah.
These are part of the experience. Often, they're what make the best stories later on. Embrace the unexpected, be resourceful. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's great advice. It seems like having a positive attitude and going with the flow can make a big difference.
It really does.
Yeah.
Remember, living abroad is an adventure, and the bumps in the road are often what make it so rewarding.
Yeah.
It's all part of the adventure, right? Speaking of adventure, the article mentions that expats should be ready for some, unique cultural differences.
That's a great point. What kind of things should expats be aware of, to make life in Accra a little smoother?
Well, Ghana has this strong tradition of respect for elders. So how you address people, showing that respect, it's important. Even small gestures, like using your right hand to give or receive something.
Oh, interesting.
It shows respect. And there's a strong sense of community, more so than in individualistic cultures.
That makes sense. So being aware of those differences, understanding that social harmony is really valued, it helps expats fit in better.
Exactly. It's like being a respectful guest in someone else's home. The article also talks about patience, especially with the bureaucracy, which can be pretty different from what some expats are used to.
Yeah. It mentions that things like visas, work permits, residency, those processes can be slow. It even suggests starting early and maybe talking to immigration experts.
Good advice.
Do you think having local contacts or a support network can help with all that?
Oh, absolutely. People who know this system, that's invaluable. Plus, you learn from their experiences, avoid some mistakes. And remember, Ghana time. It applies to bureaucracy too.
So flexibility and patience are key. The article also mentions that expats should be ready for, those utility inconsistencies like power outages, dumbsore. What can people do to handle those situations?
Well, the article suggests having backups, like generators, water tanks, but it's also about, adjusting your expectations a bit, understanding that those things just happen sometimes in Accra. It's a chance to disconnect, even if it's forced, from our constant need to be plugged in and embrace a simpler way of life.
That's actually a great way to look at it. Challenges can be opportunities, right? Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about Ghana's history and landmarks. The article mentions castles, national parks, cultural centers. There's just so much to explore.
Oh, Ghana's history is incredible. Cape Coast Castle, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's a must-see if you want to understand, the impact of the slave trade.
Wow, that sounds powerful.
It is. It evokes a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
Then there's Cocoon National Park. The article describes it as this haven of biodiversity, a rainforest canopy walkway, all kinds of wildlife. It's a great place to experience Ghana's natural beauty. And Aburi Botanical Gardens, a nice peaceful escape from Accra and Volta Lake. It's huge, the largest man-made lake in the world. Lots of options for weekend trips.
It really sounds like Ghana has the perfect mix of history, culture, and nature. The article also mentions some cultural landmarks within Accra, like the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum for the first president and the Art Center.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to any of these places?
I haven't had the chance to visit Ghana yet,
Oh, okay.
but I've heard amazing things about the Art Center. You can find hand-woven textiles, beadwork, musical instruments, paintings, a real showcase of talent.
Sounds incredible. Before we move on, I want to go back to something the article emphasizes about thriving as an expat in Ghana. It talks about building relationships with locals and other expats, being respectful of customs, and being open to learning and adapting. What are your thoughts on that?
Those are crucial, not just in Ghana, but anywhere you go. It's about going beyond just visiting, It's about immersing yourself in the culture, taking the good with the bad.
It's about opening yourself up to new things, new ways of life.
Exactly. It's a journey of self-discovery, just as much as it is about exploring a new place.
And speaking of self-discovery, the article touched on Ghana time, but I think we can explore it a bit more. It's more than just a saying, right? It's about a different pace of life.
You got it. In many cultures, time is like this rigid thing, something to manage, maximize. In Ghana, it's more fluid. Relationships, experiences, they often matter more than a strict schedule.
So it's a different way of thinking about time, not just being a little late.
Yes, it's about being in the moment, connecting with people, and letting go of the need to control every minute.
I can see how that would be both hard and freeing, especially for someone used to a fast-paced life.
It definitely takes some adjusting, but it's a chance to slow down, appreciate simple things, connect with a different rhythm.
Almost like a mindfulness practice. Throughout this deep dive, we've talked about the practical side of Ghana, but there's also the emotional and cultural adjustment. What would you say to someone who's feeling a bit overwhelmed by the idea of such a big change?
It's important to acknowledge that moving to a new country, especially one as culturally rich as Ghana, it's going to be a roller coaster. There will be excitement, wonder, but also frustration, homesickness, maybe even culture shock. Let yourself feel those things. Find healthy ways to cope.
That makes sense. Be ready for the emotional ups and downs. What are some practical tips for dealing with that?
Building a support network, locally and from afar. Connect with other expats, they get it. Talk to locals, they have insights. Stay in touch with loved ones back home, they bring familiarity.
So it's about finding that sense of community and belonging, even when everything's new.
Exactly. And don't forget about your own culture, your traditions. It's not about losing yourself, but about bringing different parts of yourself together.
Finding that balance, the new and the familiar. Now, after all this talk about Accra, what stands out to you most about expat life there?
For me, it's that mix of tradition and modern life. The article really captures that. Accra is the city where you have bustling markets and skyscrapers, traditional festivals and contemporary art scenes. It's where history and progress, they're intertwined. And that creates this really unique, vibrant energy.
I totally agree. That fusion of old and new is what makes Accra so fascinating. And we can't forget the warmth of the Ghanaian people. They seem to have found that balance between progress and preserving their heritage.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I'm thinking about something the article didn't mention directly, but it feels connected. I'm curious about Ghana's history and how it shaped the country we see today. How about you?
That's a great point. I want to learn more about Ghana's past, their path to independence, how their culture evolved, the events that made them who they are. It's like we've only scratched the surface.
Right. There's always more to learn, more to discover, more to appreciate.
And to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic. Maybe this deep dive sparked your interest in Ghana, or maybe it reignited an old one. Either way, there's so much more to learn and experience out there.
It's amazing. Every time we dig deeper into Accra, it just gets more interesting. We've talked about the practical stuff, cost of living, transportation, healthcare even. We've touched on the challenges, Dumsor, bureaucracy, and how those can actually be good things, for personal growth.
Yeah.
But for me, the most fascinating part is how Accra blends tradition and modernity, like they exist together, not one replacing the other.
Absolutely. It's a balance.
Exactly.
One minute you could be in a bustling market with traditional crafts everywhere.
Yeah.
And the next you're in some modern co-working space surrounded by tech startups. Accra embraces progress, but it doesn't lose its cultural roots.
It's a good reminder that progress doesn't have to mean getting rid of tradition. Now, I want to talk about something we haven't really addressed directly, the emotional side of moving to a new country.
The article mentions cultural sensitivity in relationships, but there's also that deeper level adjusting to a new culture emotionally.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new adventure and forget about the emotional challenges. Think about it. You're in Accra, everything's new, the sights, sounds, customs, the initial excitement fades, and then homesickness, culture shock, maybe even loneliness. Those feelings can hit. It's important to be ready for that.
That's a really good point. It's not just about the logistics of moving, it's a big life change, emotionally too. What advice would you give someone who's maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed by all that?
I think building a support system is key. both there and back home. Connect with other expats, they know what you're going through, reach out to locals, get their insights, and stay in touch with family and friends back home. They provide that familiar comfort.
So it's about building that community, a sense of belonging, even when everything else is new.
Exactly. And don't forget about your own culture, your traditions.
Yeah.
It's not about losing yourself, it's about blending everything together, becoming, well, more well-rounded.
Finding that balance, the new and the familiar. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Accra, what final thought would you leave our listener with? What really sums up everything we've talked about?
I think it's about embracing the unexpected. Accra, any new experience really, will have its surprises, good and bad. The key is to be open to it all, keep a sense of humor, and be willing to adapt. It's in those unexpected moments that you truly discover, the richness of Accra and maybe even something new about yourself.
That's a great way to put it. See challenges as opportunities, the unexpected as a chance to grow. And to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring Accra, whether it's through research, talking to people who've been there, or even planning a trip. This is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover about this amazing city.